the color line. He's playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers. And one of the stipulations that Brantley places on him is that you're not going to react to any racism on the field. You know, you're going to hear all these horrible racial slurs yelled at you to get you off your game, and just because people are racist, you're not going to react. You know, we don't want to distract from the game. And so Jackie Robinson plays along, and he becomes even more famous. Like he can take anything. Well, this is also in the late 40s, the era of the the Red Scare. And the U.S. House Un-American Activities Commission is hunting communists. And one of the big communists they're going after is Paul Robeson, who's very famous activist. He's a communist. He's also an all-American athlete, and he's also a fabulous singer. And so they called Jackie Robinson to the HUAC meeting, fully hoping that he's going to denounce Paul Robeson, right? So one black man against another black man. But what they don't know is that Jackie Robinson had served in the military, and he got court-martialed because he would not sit in the back of the bus. So you're wondering, what's Jackie Robinson going to do? Is he not going to show because impossible position, or is he going to show and denounce Paul Robeson? And his reaction is, and it's so much of what we see in the film that we just were able to look at you in action. The moral clarity and the courage and the intelligence is just remarkable. And this is something that Jackie exhibits in this congressional hearing. And so he says, he gives a speech, which is, it threads the needle in an amazing way. He says, white people must realize that the more a Negro hates communism because it opposes democracy, the more he's going to hate any other influence that kills off democracy in this country. And that goes for racial discrimination in the army, and segregation on trains and buses, and job discrimination because of religious beliefs or color or place of birth. And one other thing the American public ought to understand if we want to make progress in this matter: the fact that it is a communist who denounces injustice in the courts, police brutality, and lynching when it happens doesn't change the truth of its charges. Negroes were stirred up long before there was a Communist Party, and they'll stay stirred up long after the party has disappeared, unless Jim Crow disappears as well. And in his autobiography, which is called I Never Had It Made, he writes, "I cannot stand and sing the anthem. I cannot salute the flag. I know that I'm a black man in a white world." And so this tradition of speaking out of place and speaking up and doing it in such a clear and unambiguous way is something that is not frequent, but when it happens, it causes shockwaves. And I don't want to spend too much of your time because I would just like to sit here and listen to you talk about whatever you darn want to talk about. But what do you think has happened since in this country and maybe in the world? Because your protest was also not just about America, but sort of global hegemony of kind of ethno-nationalism and Islamophobia. How do you see things today?
With just in general, or with athletes? In general, with athletes?
A little bit of both, yeah. Whatever you want to talk about, yeah.
I think there's definitely a shift taking place. I think a lot of the shift is a result of the advent of social media. Prime example of that is, when myself, and if you look back at Craig Hodges,
yeah.
I was talking to Dr. Harry Edwards, and I never heard it presented this way until speaking to him. He was giving the example of Muhammad Ali and other figures. He said, well, when Muhammad Ali took his position, there was the Black Power movement to frame it under. When Kaepernick took his position, there was the Black Lives Matter movement to frame it under. He said, when you and Craig Hodges did what you did and spoke out, there was no movement to frame it under. Mm-hmm. So it's like you in the ocean by yourself, yeah, with no paddle, which made it, in his language, not mine, he said, which made it more difficult. And so not only that, but when you also attach to it social media, mm-hmm. There was a football player by the name of Abdullah who went into the end zone, he prostrated. Mm-hmm. Immediately the NFL said, we're going to suspend you and fine you. People got on social media and said, what about Tebow? Mm-hmm. And they pulled back.
Yeah.
And so I think social media is allowing a lot of voices that otherwise wouldn't be heard because the media at that time could control the narrative more, right? Even though they're getting some of the same letters from people. I got a lot of death threats. I got a lot of, but I also got just as much hate mail in support from different walks of life, Jews, Christians, whites, blacks, men, women, saying we agree with you and we stand for you. And I'm almost certain the media was getting that.
Yeah.
But because you didn't have social media and those voices that can be heard, they can choose to put that to the side and focus on tyranny and oppression.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think there's a shift. At the same time, I think even though there's that shift, and this is going to sound like oxymoron, not enough is still taking place. And I say that because even with the resistance, well, the protests, not resistance, I think there's a political scientist named Richard Itten, and he said he cautions against viewing protests as inherently revolutionary.
Yeah, yeah.
Because once it becomes routine and accepted, then it's easily folded and shaped into the hegemonic understanding of things. So it's easy for the system to put it in a capsule, to monetize it, to co-opt it. And so you're seeing a lot of that take place now. Just like with Kaepernick. You know, the book that we have out is through his publication. And I would say to a lot of people, I said, look, he has to be careful how he navigates through this. Because you come out, you take a position, and you're out in the public, then people gravitate to you. And then if now after that, the only time they see you is when you're selling something, shoes, the documentary, they're going to begin to question if you've been co-opted.
Exactly, yeah.
And so that's the dangerous part. And it's easy, oh, put a shirt on, you know, do this. So, yeah, that's how I look at it.
Well, you mentioned Harry Edwards. I don't know if many people know who Harry Edwards is, but he was one of the planners of the '68 Olympic protest. And he taught at Berkeley. I went to Berkeley. I teach at Stanford. I went to Berkeley. So he, and the story of the protest in '68 has everything to do with the media. Because what happened, and John writes about this in his book, is they're flying into Mexico City, and the police are killing students in the square. And there's blood everywhere, and they want to clean it up before the Olympic cameras get there. And so, the athletes who are going to protest are caught in this very difficult position because Martin Luther King has just been assassinated. And Martin Luther King was part of the planning as well. So they were really improvising at the moment when they took the stand. And yet again, this tremendous sense of moral clarity and also solidarity with the protesting students, knowing full well the importance of the media coverage. So another question I wanted to ask you, I mean, here we are in Silicon Valley, and probably the least spiritual place that, you know, how, and I wanted to talk to folks here, how do you maintain your spirituality in a world that seems so, as you say, commercialized, and so everything you take can be twisted into being an opportunity for something other than what it's actually meant to do? And this is what we see in the film too. You made a simple and honest spiritual statement, and it got taken way out of dimension. So how do you stay true to your spirituality, I guess is what I want to ask.
That's a great question. As a Muslim, you know, there's this conversation about, are we spiritual beings, are we physical? I mean, you hear all of this dialogue. Islam doesn't separate, you know, like in the society, you hear the conversation of separation of church and state, right? We don't separate the masjid from politics, right? And so, yeah, I think Frederick Douglass has a famous saying, you know, in terms of prayer. He said, I prayed for freedom for 20 years and I never received an answer until I started praying with my legs. Yeah. And so, you know, in Islam, there's these verses that deal with, you know, for example, there's a word nafs. And there's so many verses where Allah mentions the nafs. And when he talks about the soul and the spirit, he's talking about more so who you are. And there's a word named jism. I think it means the physical body, right? And so this is like this jacket. This is not who I am. Yeah. This is, you know, so always trying to navigate through both, always feeling, you know, in so many words, the connection between whatever we do here as a Muslim. It's all of the things that we do here is meant to elevate us to something else, but we have to go through this thing. So whatever I go through, and also wherever Allah talks about a challenge and a struggle, you know, He says, most surely will I try you through hunger, loss of lives, and worldly goods, but give good news to those who are patient in adversity. But when they're confronted with calamities, they say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. To God do we belong, to God should return. And so there's so many other verses. I'm not going to give you a burden that you can't bear. With difficulty comes ease. So every time He hits you with a challenge and a hardship, He's reinforcing it constantly with something good. So for me, it's always about that mizan, that balance between the two worlds. And so for me, this is what I'm constantly keeping in mind, that which helps to keep a balance for me and to keep me grounded. Because it's easy. It's easy to, you know, there's a sister named Yasmin, I forget her last name, but she said, what you focus on grows, right? And so it's easy to allow all of these things that's taking place to pull you away.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult. It's not easy. It sounds easy, but it's not easy to negotiate the two and to keep that balance.
Yeah.
But this is what I'm thinking about.
It wouldn't be real if it was easy. I really want to get questions from the audience, and I know you must be exhausted, so I don't want to keep you too long.
Look, I'm good. This is where I want to be.
Okay. Well, in that case, one other question before we turn it over. I was so struck and moved by the intergenerational element of this film, right? Your parents, you, your son. So how do you raise your son, and what would you say to young people who are looking at you and what you went through and wondering, you know, what would you say to them in terms of careers and spirituality and finding meaning and being in families?
That's loaded. There's so much you can say. You know, I'm always big on, when I talk to my children, first and foremost, and I know we live in a world where religion is somewhat taboo.
Yep.
You know, and I try, even whether I'm talking to, there's a saying to speak to the level of a person's intelligence. Not just here, but emotional intelligence. So, and it's not always easy to gauge, right? But this is what we try to do. And so the first thing, when I talk to people, I try to get a sense of what they're interested in. You know, I try to focus on that first. And then from there, oftentimes, if you're interested in something, if you love something, right, one, it doesn't seem like work. You gravitate to it much easier, but you find out, because there's this intersectionality with information and things, you find out that you learn something about something else along the way, right?
Nice.
And then it kind of has the ability to produce this wholeness, you know, in the human being. So I say, find something that you love and gravitate to that, build up on it, be genuine, own it, and then God will show you the rest. You've got to show you the rest. And so that's worked for me as a human being. And this is a part of where I start. But always at the same time too, seeking to evolve. You know, seeking to learn something else. Open yourself up to diversity. You know, meeting new people, right? If you're just always looking at things too, like aligning yourself with things that make you feel comfortable, you're not really gonna grow. And so you have to have the other conversations, you know, about these other things, and talk to people that don't share your faith. And don't share your politics. And you have to sit with that discomfort and how it feels.
Exactly.
And so all of that, because this is the real world we live in. And as a result of that, you get stronger. And whatever you're trying to become also, and there's so much into this question, but whatever you're trying to become, they've done studies and they said, well, and I say this all the time, if you're not in shape, hang around somebody in shape. If you're not smart, hang around smart people. If you want to be an activist, because there's a lifestyle that comes with while they're in that position. There's a language that comes with it. and eventually it rubs off, right? And then when I took my position,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't start off that way, but my focus changed. I started reading and paying attention to other authors
Mm-hmm.
and having conversations about other things, and it just, it's amazing. Once that engine is turned on, it's hard to turn it off.
Yeah.
And then you begin to take the shape of what you're reading and
Exactly.
listening to.
Yeah.
Because it influences you whether you think it does not. And so it becomes, the more you do it, it becomes nice. It's like you can't see yourself not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is kind of like the conversation I have among other things.
So much of what you said resonates because, I'm a Buddhist,
Mm-hmm.
and yesterday we're having this graduate admissions. So we have all these new graduate students coming, and so we have this little round table, and my colleague said, let's talk about what is the future of literary studies? And it got to me, and I said, I'm going to give the most unintellectual answer to that question, because why are we thinking about the future? Why aren't we living in the present? Because the future means for them, jobs and careers and all that. But if you're not passionate about life as you see it in the moment, you're not going to be a very interesting person, because you're going to be pegged to a future that's probably going to shift by the time you get there, right? So that's a little word of advice to graduate students. It's a tough life. Being a student's a tough life, but being a student requires being humble instead of afraid. And there's a difference between the two, right? Fear sort of channels you into violence and reaction, and humility gives you the kind of openness to exactly what you're saying, to be flexible when life throws what it throws at you. Shall we just open it up to the audience? And then I do have, before we say goodbye, which won't be for a while, I will tell you what John Carlos told me he told Colin Kaepernick at the moment that happened.
I like John Carlos.
Yeah. Okay.
Passion.
Yeah. So why don't we go ahead with questions from the audience?
Okay.